welcome to week 6 of our weekly social isolation CRICKETher Vodcast. This week, once again, by the magic of technology, we're being transported to a ground where we have both happy memories and some not so happy memories as well, don't we, Syd?
Yep, but where is it? That's the question.
Yeah, so...
Let us know if you can guess when and where.
Okay. So, this week, quite a lot's happened actually, given that there's not been any live cricket. We've had the ECB, importantly, had a board meeting on Friday, and they announced some decisions. So there's going to be no professional cricket now until at least 1st of July, so that's another delay to the start of the season. Tom Harrison said that the plan is for there to be the international cricket that was due to take place in June. Well, for us, that would be the series against India. They're hoping to reschedule that as well as some of the men's stuff for later in the season, as late as possible. So that will be looking at August or September. Obviously, from our perspective, that would mean that the India series then has to be fitted around the South Africa games, which are due to be played in September. So that will be interesting. But yeah.
We'll just shunt them to December and play them at a ground in December. I'm sure Lords will be fine in December.
Brilliant. The UK, we're renowned for being sunny all year round. And there was also an interesting thing because we read the original press release and, we're obviously interested to see the reference to the India Women's Series being moved. And then on Saturday morning, we woke up and had another look at the press release when we were planning this podcast. And they'd added a bit, so we don't know when it was added, but it was quite interesting because the bit that they'd added actually was a nod to women's domestic cricket, which had been absent from the original press release, essentially saying that the elite domestic stuff, so by that we assume that they mean the new COE fixtures, which are scheduled for late August and September, that those will possibly go ahead as planned, but that they will that will be re-evaluated down the line. So that was a bit of a nod to women's domestic cricket, which was interesting. So what do you make of all that then, Syd?
Well, I mean, overall, again, they didn't really say an awful lot, particularly in regards to the women's game. They do appear to have kind of made some decisions by default about the way the men's game is going, because there just won't be time, for instance, to fit in a full men's county championship. But they still haven't really said how they're going to actually address that. And with the women's cricket, they haven't directly addressed the issue of the T20 Cup, although because that technically falls under recreational cricket, that's basically off at the moment. But no one's explicitly said whether it's completely abandoned, whether there'll be an attempt to reschedule it. I know that Heather Knight said on the CRICKETher's podcast that there was a hope that they might be able to reschedule it, but obviously, they're looking at kind of, at the best case scenario, shunting in an awful lot of cricket into August and September, and something's going to have to give in all forms of cricket, and I suspect that will be the T20 Cup in terms of our domestic cricket, if anything gives.
There's also been this sort of renewed talk about the ECB almost leading the way in terms of working with the British government to try and find a way of staging sporting fixtures kind of in what's being termed a biosecure environment. So that would be, in cricketing terms, all the teams would have to be quarantined in hotels attached to grounds, and you would sort of create this sterile environment around them. And the ECB have said that they are taking the lead in terms of discussions with the government about how that might look. So kind of coming up with some plans that then would have to be approved by the government if international cricket was going to take place. So we've sort of previously been a bit sceptical on these vodcasts about the possibility of that actually happening, but it does seem that the interesting kind of new slant to this is that the suggestion is that the government are actually seriously looking into this as an option. It's no longer just coming from the boards, it's coming from the government as well, who seem to recognise that there's, I suppose, sort of a morale aspect to sport taking place, in terms of people getting a bit fed up with things not happening as they would have expected, and therefore the government kind of getting in on the act there, and working with the ECB. So it's not just the ECB saying, "Oh, we'd quite like to make a bit of money from our TV deal, please."
Yeah, I mean, it's the ECB obviously need to work with the government, and there's no point in not working with them. I think what they've realised really sensibly is that if you're going to have any chance of making this stuff happen, it's no good just blue sky thinking, saying, well, we could play the cricket on the moon. Unless you get the government's permission to actually fly a rocket to the moon, then that's not going to happen. So they need to work with the government. They've recognised that, and they're doing so. And let's see what happens. I mean, it will be great if they can get some of the cricket on, men's or women's. Obviously, the money coming into the game is important in terms of being able to to play something and bring some money into the sport and to satisfy the sponsors and the TV rights holders a bit, then that's important. So
there was something else interesting that Tom Harrison said, actually, that I spotted, which kind of relates to stuff that we've previously said, which is that we think that international cricket is much less likely to happen than some of the C of E fixtures, or some of even the kind of rebel women's county championship stuff that was scheduled for September. And because that's more recreational, we thought that might be more likely to go ahead. But actually, Tom Harrison said, well, there's no difference between the level of kind of biosecurity that's going to be required for international cricket and for domestic cricket. And even for recreational cricket, he said that the standard's got to be the same because it's the health of the players, whether men or women, whether international or domestic, their health has got to come first. And I thought that was quite interesting, because they obviously are thinking about the whole game and trying to take a whole game perspective. And that seems quite strange to me in a way that they're going to apply a similar standard.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult one. Obviously, if you're thinking primarily about the health of the players, then you need to ensure that everyone can go into the game knowing that they're not going to come out of it with a potentially lethal virus. So, in that sense, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think it is obviously the case that there's different scales of what you need for the different levels of cricket, and there's different scales of what you need, obviously, for men's Test cricket to go ahead than say for a women's T20 international. So all those things do have their own level. So I'm not sure that he would actually really agree with himself if you put it to him in a bit more detail. But I understand the gist of what he was saying was that what's important primarily is to ensure the safety of the men and women on the field.
Well, he did go on and say the cost argument becomes more complicated as you go down through the professional ranks to the recreational game. So there was a nod there to this idea that actually, as far as we might see it, you've got kind of your men's Test cricket up here in terms of how much money it makes, and your recreational game down here, and probably women's cricket somewhere in the middle, which is a little bit worrying from our perspective, that despite everything the ECB is saying about how they do seem to have kind of recognised the importance of making sure that some women's fixtures can go ahead as well, the priority in terms of money making isn't going to be with our game, which is a bit of a concern.
Yeah, but that's probably life as well to a certain extent. That that while technically Sky's contract covers men's and women's cricket, and that there'll be no, as far as I'm aware, no division lines in the contract saying we've paid this much for the men's cricket and this much for the women's cricket. They have bought it collectively. Nevertheless, what Sky want to put on television probably is a men's England cricket. And that will be their priority, and they'll be putting pressure on the ECB themselves. I'm sure that they would deny that in public,
yeah.
But in private, I would suspect that that they're poking the ECB, going, "This is what we would prefer." And it may be that they would say we prefer men's 2020s, for example. The Sky may go, well, actually, it would be better if you can give us 5 2020s rather than one Test match. That's possible.
I suppose that might end up coming into it. We don't know what's happening behind closed doors in terms of what Sky and the ECB are saying to each other. One decision that didn't come out of Friday's board meeting was any kind of actual definitive call on whether the 100 will go ahead this year. So that's been pushed back to another meeting on Wednesday. So they've postponed that a bit. There was, however, an interesting article by George Dobell earlier in the week, which related to the 100, essentially speculating that potentially if it didn't go ahead this year, which we'd have to say does look unlikely, if it didn't go ahead this year, then it might end up just getting called off altogether. The ECB will have a new chairman coming in. The ECB will also obviously be suffering financially, given the state of the season, whatever happens. And we know that the 100 was going to cost the ECB more money in the first 5 years than it was going to bring in revenue. So it's something like it was going to cost them 57 million and bring in 50 million. Or that was what the budget was. And so therefore George Dobell was kind of saying, well, maybe it will just get scrapped altogether, which is an interesting piece, wasn't it, Sid? What did you make of that?
Well, I mean, every year that goes on, you get changes in organisations, and organisations want to move things forward, and it always felt on the cards that the 100 was a big radical step, and that as the board evolved, as new members came in, as a new chairperson came in, they're going to want to make their mark, and they're not necessarily going to have the same priorities. So you've got the existing chairman going, we need the 100 more than ever because of this. The 100 really matters, but of course the 100's his baby. The 100 won't be the next man's baby, so we'll see about that. And I guess that we'll learn something this week. It was clear that at last week's meeting there was no agreement. So they would have agreed if they'd been able to. They obviously weren't able to agree within the time frame of the meeting, so they've pushed that back. There'll be voices saying we should postpone it till next year. There'll be some voices saying we should still attempt to play something this year. And I'm sure that at the back of some people's minds in that room, there will be the thought that maybe we just get rid of it. We use this opportunity to take it behind the woodshed and put it out of its misery.
Now, for the men's game, if there was no 100, then they just crack on with the T20 Blast. From our perspective, it's slightly more complicated by the fact that they've kind of already abolished the Kia Super League and will be left without a kind of jewel in the crown competition, as it were. So what would happen for us?
Well, we've still got the Centres of Excellence, and the idea already was that we'd play 50 over cricket among the Centres of Excellence. That was supposed to happen in September, and would have happened in September definitely if it wasn't for the situation that we're in. So there's no reason why they shouldn't bolt on a T20 competition onto that. I mean, you could call it something like the Kia Super League, and get sponsorship from somebody like Kia, and bang on. I mean, Kia will presumably be keen to sponsor it because it will be called the Kia Super League. I mean, you'd have trouble getting BMW to sponsor it under those circumstances. But maybe Kia will be up for that. Maybe somebody should ask them.
I think actually that they were intending to have T20s attached to the Centres of Excellence.
Yeah,
it just
that
wasn't
had been
coming in until
talked about,
2021, and obviously was made slightly more complicated by the fact that the T20 County Cup had been given a kind of stay of execution, as it were, for this season and next season. So it could be that the Centres of Excellence just carry on as intended, and they pick up where the 100 hasn't exactly left off because it never got off the ground, but you know what I mean. And that would be quite interesting. I suppose the people I would feel very sorry for are the people who have then given hours of their lives to working out the women's 100 and planning for that, and if it didn't go ahead, then that would be very disappointing for some people at the ECB personally. But we'll just have to wait and see. And in particular, we're very much looking forward to hearing the results of Wednesday's board meeting, which we'll no doubt be discussing in next week's Social Isolation Vodcast. So that's kind of the English season dealt with in a manner of speaking, although there's still lots of uncertainty. The next big event, though, as far as we were concerned, was going to be the World Cup, the 50 over World Cup in New Zealand, scheduled for February 2021. And as far as we were hoping, especially given that New Zealand seems to have the pandemic well under control, much better than we do here, we were hoping that would be able to go ahead as normal and on schedule in February 2021. However, there was a suggestion this week that we were being somewhat optimistic about that, because, not for anything to do with the pandemic necessarily, but because the IPL is being pushed back to October. that means that the men's T20 World Cup in Australia in October/November can't go ahead, wouldn't be able to go ahead as scheduled. And then there was talk that they were going to postpone that until February 2021, which, oh dear, whoops-a-daisy, happens to clash with the next women's tournament, but never mind, because they can just move it. And if I'm sounding a bit sarcastic and a bit cross, it's because I am a bit cross, because the suggestion that they're going to deliberately reschedule a men's tournament for when a women's tournament was already scheduled, and therefore force us to move ours, made me quite angry. So, what do you make of it all, Sid? Let's give a rational perspective.
Well, it shows you where the power is, and the power in cricket follows the money, and the money comes, as far as people are concerned, from the IPL. So it's the IPL that's taken priority here. They've got, the Indian authorities have gone, well, the top priority for cricket globally has to be to run the IPL this year. That forces the T20 World Cup to get shunted, and then at that point they go, well, we still want to run the T20 World Cup within the Australian season. So that forces that into, sort of January, February time, at which point, you've got a problem with the Women's World Cup.
Because you don't think it's logistically possible to stage 2 ICC tournaments at once? Because my reaction to that would be to go, okay, fine, you want to move yours to February, that's fine, we'll crack on. And I reckon if I was the New Zealand government, that's what I'd be saying, because they've staked a lot and done a lot of planning around this. And actually it's quite important for them to be staging such an important global tournament as quite a small country.
Yeah, and I understand that the people's concerns that about that. The issue really is a practical one, that the ICC have a team of staff that run World Cups, and those those people can only be in one place at once. That includes people that work on the TV side, people that do the cameras, and people that do the TV production. There's only so many of these people, and if they're in Australia, then they're not going to be in New Zealand, and then your ability to actually deliver that World Cup is severely diminished. So that's the practical reality, unfortunately. But I'm no happier about it than you are. But unfortunately,
I'm just a bit more rational than I am.
On this particular issue.
You're the calm one in the relationship. Okay, one last bit of news this week, which is that Sana Mir is obviously a true great of Pakistani cricket generally and women's cricket specifically, has retired after a long and very successful international career. She's certainly been a brilliant role model for young girls growing up in Pakistan, showing them that it's very possible to be a sportswoman. So congratulations to her, and thank you so much for everything that you've given to the sport. I just thought we could wrap up the podcast with a lovely story about when Syd met Sana Mir during the 2017 World Cup. It was at Taunton, and we'd just been watching Pakistan. I think they just lost to the West Indies. And we were basically, I think we were the only 2 journalists in the press conference. Maybe there was a couple of other people. But it was a relatively minor match that clashed with some other more major fixtures. And Sana Mir was kind of saying in the press conference, oh, this could be my last World Cup. Don't know whether I'll be playing in 2021. And as it transpires, it will be her last World Cup. So, yeah. And what happened, Sid?
Well, it's obviously a bit of a legend. She's been playing since 2005, so yeah. I went to say thank you, and I went up to her and I shook her hand and I said thank you for all you've done, and she was very confused.
She was like, who is this guy?
Who is this man, and why is he shaking my hand?
Why is he shaking my hand?
But
I've just realised that would be really inappropriate now. You'd have to elbow bump her and be like, well done. So elbow bump Sana Mir. Thanks for everything, and thanks for just looking slightly askance at Syd and not saying, who the hell are you, you crazy weirdo, when we met you. Okay, that's a great place.
And on that bombshell.
That's a great place to wrap up. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Have a good week, and we'll see you in a week's time. Stay safe and well.